How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, giving you guys your July 2019 horoscope for Aquarius, Sun, and Rising. Thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'm giving you guys all the positive energy I have because this isn't new. We've been talking about this, and every other astrologer has been talking about July since January. And there's a lot going on this month, and there's a lot of changes, there's a lot of realizations going on that are going to be turned into events, that will turn into different beliefs, that will turn into different actions and behaviors. However, the one thing I wanted to hit on with this month is, although it's pretty gnarly, it's really like planting seeds for things to get really good in August and September. So I will say that this month is going to be pretty rough, but do whatever it takes to get through it or just go with the flow of things because as we start moving forward, things are going to start looking fresher. So to begin, we're starting July off on July 1st with Mars entering Leo. And this is pretty important because as Mars has been in Cancer in your 6th house, it's been, causing maybe some health issues, been hard to take action, you've been really busy at the same time. Now Mars, the planet of our action and our drive, our intentions, what we're doing and how we're doing it. It's also the planet of our anger, frustrations. It can cause some, inflammation and some problems. It's now going into the sign of Leo where it's not in detriment, it's not in fall, it's trining, it's in some type of a relationship to its domicile lord. But as Mars goes into the 7th house, this is where you're going to start seeing Mars stuff happen in relationships. 7th house is all about relationships, whether it's marriage or individual partnerships or just one-on-one. It has to do with lawsuits as well. It has to do anything with balance, almost in a sense. Now, as Mars goes into the 7th house, this is definitely taking some more action and some putting more energy and directing it towards relationships. However, as Mars is a malefic, this is also maybe some problems going on in relationships, some irritations, maybe some hurt egos or bruised egos, I should say. But on the next day, on July 2nd, that is when we'll have the solar eclipse in Cancer. And this is going to be pretty important. We've been talking about this for a couple months. And on July 2nd, that's when we start eclipse season. And this is going to last for the next 2 weeks. And as this North Node's been in Cancer, you've been focusing more on what are your habits, your behaviors, what are you doing every single day, what is your employment like? That has to do with employment, what your habits are, as well as this has to do with your health and, things like that. So as the North Node's been transiting there and you've been feeling more of this urge to focus on these things, this new moon, even though it's a solar eclipse, is kind of putting like an emphasis on this area of there's definitely going to be either more of a workload or something going on in that area that's going to draw a lot of your attention. But on the next day, on July 3rd, this is when Venus enters Cancer. And Venus, of course, is the planet of love and relationships, and she's been in your 5th house having a lot of fun recently. As Venus starts to go into Cancer, she's starting to bring more value and sentiment to the essentials. Venus is looking for, not only nurturing and being taken care for, but being the caregiver. Venus is wanting to not only protect, but also value that connection and establish that trust. And as Venus goes into Cancer, she's entering your 6th house. And this is of your work, of your day-to-day activities, of your health and your habits. So as Venus goes into Cancer, this is bringing more, in a sense, value here and bringing some benefits towards you. It may be a little bit, it's the 6th house. It's not the best house in the world. But as Venus goes through there, this is bringing more value and understanding more of where you need to take care of yourself in that area of your life. But then on July 8th, that is when Mercury stations retrograde in Leo in your 7th house. And I did a whole video about the Mercury retrograde, so make sure you guys go check it out. However, this is a Mercury retrograde, and so miscommunications, things are going to be kind of like confusing. You're going to retrace your steps again over what the past couple weeks have brought. But this is happening in your 7th house of relationships, of other people. And this is also going to be when Mars is conjoining Mercury almost to the degree on that day. And so Mars heats things up and it severs and it cuts and Mercury's right there. My biggest suggestion is definitely watch what you say around other people, but at the same time, your chart's not always about you. So the 7th house may be someone, not you, bringing some miscommunication or saying some words. My biggest advice with this is while this is all in Leo, focus on being authentic. Focus on being in integrity and, having that loyalty and speaking out that truth that needs to be said. But then about a week later on July 16th, this is when we have the lunar eclipse in Capricorn happening. Now, you've had Saturn, Pluto, and the South Node all hitting your 12th house. And the 12th house is all about repressed parts of yourself, unacknowledged parts of yourself, the subconscious, what we don't always see, it was hidden things like hidden enemies. Now, as you've had Saturn and Pluto and the South Node go through your 12th house, it's been kind of rough for a little bit. But what I think this 12th house stuff has been bringing up is what have you been realizing about yourself that you might not have acknowledged in the past? And what are you learning of what structures of framework that you've made up for yourself that don't really necessarily serve you any longer? And so while the full moon happens, it should be lighting up this axis in your chart. It's actually getting eclipsed. And so this is kind of a time of going like, the way that I've structured myself and how like automatic you've become on some certain things just doesn't work for you any longer. Now, on July 16th, Venus is also going to be opposing Saturn. And so while Venus is in Cancer and you're being like, yes, I'm starting to have more of a healthy work routine and, having better habits and taking care of my health and all that kind of good stuff. Venus opposing Saturn on this eclipse too is kind of going like, yeah, I can't do that. And this stuff that, the framework and the structures that you've kind of subconsciously put on the back burner that have been kind of like upholding you in a sense, that kind of doesn't work anymore. And Venus opposing Saturn is kind of like, oh, well, I can't do this until I fix this or figure out what's going on here. But I say that because on the next day, on July 17th, this is when Venus is going to conjoin the North Node. So even though that Venus opposed Saturn thing is going to be rough, we have Venus conjoining the North Node the next day. And this is kind of like being more clear and having more of a hunger for bringing more of that value and more of that tenderness and that connection and that trust in your work life, in your habits, in your health, and bringing more value of protecting and nurturing that. And as it conjoins the North Node, this is kind of like being like, you know what? The universe might have said no, but I'm still going for this anyway because this is what I want. And that's going to be really important as we kind of move on for the next couple weeks. But then 2 days later, on July 19th, that is when we have Mercury retrogressing back into Cancer. Now, as Mercury retrograded in your 7th house of relationships, the 6th house of, work and health and habits and all that kind of good stuff, Mercury going back into Cancer is kind of going on like, well, what needs to be addressed and what needs to be done about this? Where do, the 6th house is also things like breaking and not working, falling apart. It's kind of like it's like where the sun goes right after sunset. And so it's like a dimming of light. It's a succedent house. Anyway, as Mercury goes back into Cancer, I think this is reworking a certain plan or your, not necessarily like your day-to-day habits, but kind of like reshifting what matters in what areas in order to establish that, that sincerity and that trust and that integrity within the relationships. So, retrogressing back into it is one thing, but I think it's the next day, on July 21st, like 3 days later, Mercury actually goes Cazimi with the sun. And this is what's important because Mercury is now right in between the Earth and the sun. This is kind of like Mercury getting purified by fire. This is a lot of clarity and understanding. And as this is in the 6th house and this is in Cancer, I think this is focusing on what needs need to be attended to and logically understanding what mindset you need to put on, okay, like if you want to bring more health and more better things into not only your day-to-day environment, but also the relationships too, it comes from a empathetic understanding of yourself and the other people that are involved in it. But then on July 23rd, that is when we have the sun moving into Leo, and it is your unbirthday. You'll get there in 6 months, but as the sun moves into Leo, into your 7th house, the sun, of course, is the main luminary. It brings light to mostly everything, gives us life on this earth, which is pretty cool. But as the sun goes into your 7th house, this is bringing a general focus and a general look at relationships in themselves. And this is, not only committed like relationships like marriages and partnerships and stuff like that, but this is just the one-on-one, the individual relationship stuff as that goes as general, basically as possible. But then July 24th, we have Mercury conjoining Venus. And I think this is really important because as Venus has been transiting Cancer in your 6th house, and you're like, I'm really starting to value the way I'm doing things now. Mercury kind of being questioned about what its emotions are and how it feels about things and what it wants to do about it conjoining Venus is kind of like, you know, oh, like I actually do value this, and I'm okay, and I'm ready to do the work that it takes, and I'm ready to do this in a better way. I'm ready to put more value and more healing and more love and sense of, you know, trust and nurturing and taking care of how you do things with your life. Like, what are you doing every day? What is your health like? And that doesn't just mean physical. That means mental. That means emotional. That means spiritual. And then on July 28th, that is when we have Venus entering Leo. And this starts to get positive because, of course, Venus is the planet of love and connection and beauty. She wants you to indulge and have fun and bring things to you. And as Venus is in Leo, the sign of the light, you know, Venus wants to be admired. Venus wants to, you know, stand out. Venus wants to have fun and be expressive and be, you know, authentic. So as Venus transits your 7th house of relationships, I think this is bringing a lot more centered focus on relationships for you guys, especially as we go into August. But as Venus goes into there, this is bringing more of the connection, more of the harmony, and more of the fun. But then as we end the month on July 31st, that is when we have the new moon in Leo. And now we have Mars, we have the Sun, Moon, and Venus, and eventually Mercury going into Leo. They're all going to be trining Jupiter and Sagittarius, which is in your 11th house of friendships. Now, as this is happening, I think this new moon is going to be really looking at relationships in a whole new way. And that doesn't, and you know, I say relationships because you have a relationship with one person, you have a relationship with items, you have a relationship with your work, you have a relationship like with your habits. Like, everything can be a mirror to what you do and how you think and who you are. And that can show up and manifest in people, and that can manifest in experiences and so on and so forth. But I think with all this Leo stuff, there's a lot of light being brought here. And there's Mars and there's Venus. So there's this change and there's this growth with it, but there's also this value being added. And so I think this new moon is definitely going to be a time to really look at your relationship with everything. And, you know, you're Aquarius rising. It's easy to be distant and disconnected and, you know, outcasted almost in a sense. Like, this is Leo shit. Like, you're probably, not only are other people in your life going to take the spotlight, like, you're going to have a lot of that too. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'll be seeing you next month.